hands in the sky if you're feeling the vibe. This is the Poet Will Be Televised. Put your hands in the sky if you're feeling the vibe. This is the Poet Will Be Televised. Put your hands in the sky if you're feeling the vibe. This is the Poet Will Be Televised. Put your hands by your side, you feeling the vibe. This is the Poet Will Be Televised. Break it down.
Hello, 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 everyone. This is Dale Novella. I will be your host this evening on Poets to the People, brought to you by Skye's Crescent Radio and Funkadelic Studios. And here at Poets to the People, we explore topics in today's social and political climate while enjoying highlighted clips from the monthly jam session. The Poet Will Be Televised. So welcome and thank you for listening in tonight. We have an amazing panel of educators and just all around cool people. And I will get started introducing with Kwame Baird. Kwame is a Bronx born and raised, an ELA teacher and dean at Bronx Community High School, a passionate educator. Kwame earned a master's in education from Pace University and a master's in educational leadership from the City College of New York. Through the lens of literary analysis, Kwame encourages young people to ask critical questions about the world they live in and themselves. Entering year number 18, Kwame will continue to advocate for young people across the Bronx and beyond. Welcome, Kwame. How are you doing today?
Everything's good. Nice to be here with all of you.
Awesome. Happy to have you. Moving on, we have David King. David King is an interdisciplinary artist, educator, curator, and facilitator. He was born in Queens and raised in Brooklyn on the ancestral lands of the Munsee, Lenape, Canarsie, and Mennekuk.
Matinecock.
Yes, thank you.
Of course.
Matinecock peoples. He is the program director of school and community partnerships at Community Word Project and sits on the board of directors at the New York City Arts and Education Roundtable, where he also co-chairs the Advocacy Committee. He is an innovative cultural advocacy fellow with the Caribbean Cultural Center African Diaspora Institute, also known as CCC-ADI, and David graduated from Brooklyn Tech and earned a BA in theater from the City College of New York. He appreciates those who contribute to the process. Thank you for being here again, David.
Thank you. City College stand up, and Dale, you can take revenge out on me later. Sorry for the wordplay.
Oh, no, don't even worry about it. I was giving myself hell before we logged on. I was like, I'm going to get it. And no, no.
All good. All good. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Thank you for coming. All right. Moving on to Nicole Quintana-Wolf. Nicole Quintana-Wolf is a former New York City public school teacher turned teacher wellness coach and trauma-informed breathwork facilitator. She helps educators recover from burnout and find work-life balance both in and out of the classroom. Thank you for being here, Nicole.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And last but not least, let's talk to the love of my life, the most wonderful Mikal Amin, savior of Black and Brown youth all over the world. Mikal Amin is a master of the craft, a 20-year veteran of New York City's independent hip-hop movement. He has toured 13 countries over 10 years as an artist, educator, and ambassador, a published essayist and scholar. He is also the co-curator and producer of Brooklyn Academy of Music's hip-hop showcase, Word, Sound, Power. Thank you for being here, Mikal Amin.
It's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure. And when we get into the conversation, we're going to talk about David's background because that's wild. That's dope. But that's another thing.
You heard the part about CCC-ADI?
Oh, we've been had that convo. Okay. Yeah, we've been had that convo. Yeah, it's great to be here. And before you continue, I just want to introduce our host. She is the event producer, founder of Power to the Poet podcast. The Poet Will Be Televised, Muse, and Dale Novella Presents. She's a singer-songwriter, producer, and a seasoned teaching artist of 6 years. She's run the Poet Will Be Televised for 7 years here in New York City, a monthly hip-hop jam showcase that is actually going to be evolving, morphing, and changing into something brand new and great. I'm sure she'll let us in on that a little bit later. Miss Dale Novella Anderson Lee, how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for the introduction. Also, this is Poets to the People, but I like Power to the Poets. That's also really cute.
Oh, I'm seeing now. I'm messing with the wordplay. It's too much power. Too much power.
Too much power. Not enough power. Not enough power to the poet. Or depending on who you ask, there should be no power to anyone. Power to everyone and no one at the same time, depending on who you ask. All right, so I have a question for all of you before we get into our first video, which is from Mikal and I. The question is, I wanted to start on a high note. What is your favorite memory of any part of your education experience? It can be grade school, it can be college, it can be master's degree, it can be teaching in the classroom. What is your favorite part?
I'm gonna just jump in and break the ice with that. 8th grade through early high school, but 8th grade, Mr. Earl had us do poetry, to submit poetry. There wasn't really super formal, what is a poem? It's just like, write poetry and enter this contest. And I did. And that's basically, that stayed with me until now, because I was able to express myself in a way I never had prior. And I like kind of doubled down on like, oh, I actually really like words and expressing myself without having to open my mouth. Like I can do it in a different way than I was accustomed to, especially as someone who was still getting over. It's not like I stuttered heavy, but there was stuttering there, and there was a lot of shyness, which is still there. So it allowed me to access a different part of myself, and then that extended briefly into high school. Junior year maybe, or senior year. I didn't start acting until senior year, but again, it was like the last moment of middle school and the last moment of high school. I tried stuff, or was invited to try stuff, and let go, and that has been foundational for my life. So thank you to Mr. Earl, and I can't remember the teacher's name in high school, but thank you to her as well. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, David. Who would like to go next? Nicole.
All right. So I would say for me, it was a high school history teacher that I had, Mr. Nichols, junior year. And he taught history in a way that was so different than I had ever experienced it. Instead of this presentation of facts and kind of this is how it is, he really taught us to zoom out and to question everything. Who put this into place and why? And why are we still doing it? And I think having that lens of viewing society, of viewing the education system, of really questioning things and not just going with the status quo because that's how it's always been done, has really shifted really my whole life trajectory and what I'm doing now. So very grateful to him.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Nicole. Kwame, did I see your, yes.
Yeah, I'm ready. So for me, my favorite memories in education have always been more about the relationships rather than actually what's going on in the classroom. So I think my favorite personal memory that I experienced when I was younger was when my JV basketball coach, who was also my religion teacher and Black history teacher, he took myself and a group of students from a high school out to his hometown of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to spend the weekend and play in a basketball tournament. So, he was my favorite teacher, still to this day, my favorite teacher. And I was always grateful to him that he, took me out to Milwaukee. To this day, Milwaukee is the furthest west I've been in this country. And I have him to thank for it.
Thank you, Kwame.
It's actually interesting. I grew up in a pretty racist town, and thusly the schooling was such. So I don't really have many fond memories of my K through 12 experience. But college for me, I'm an alumnus of Marist College, and similar to what Kwame was talking about, it was really an experience with, ironically enough as well, my only of color teacher and professor my entire history of education, Dr. Diane Hargraves, who is a dear friend and mentor to this day. And, you know, the time spent with her and really just in the English department, the humanities department at Marist, was the first time as a student that I actually felt validated in my ideas. I felt validated in my opinions. It was a very new feeling for me to be with educators and them not looking at me as a peer, but looking at me as someone with value. As a teenager, didn't really feel that as much in school. And Dr. Hargrave in particular was monumental. She actually, I'd spoken with her late last year, and she actually had reminded me that she allowed me for one of my papers in her class to actually create a piece in and around hip hop. And that was the first time I had completely forgotten this particular moment. But I realized we were reflecting kind of on our relationship. I realized like a lot of the seeds of what I am now are from and through that relationship with Dr. Hargrave. And I realized I've tried to emulate a lot of the things that I learned, not necessarily from her, but just because of my interactions and the way in which she treated me and treated her students has been a model that I've tried to follow in my own career. But those are my fondest memories, just those interactions and just that advocacy and that friendship and that mentorship.
All of your experiences were centered around a pivotal teacher, which is beautiful. I don't know if like my band teacher really like pushed, I don't know. I've always been like very passionate about music and the arts. So like my poetry teachers over the years and my band teacher had a big effect on me, but like just knowing that it was there, like if I, you know, slept through all my other classes, but I was in the band room and I was blowing hard. I played the saxophone. And like, and then in high school, I was a saxophone section leader, and just knowing like I had this role that I really cared about and that I loved, it like carried me through whatever was going on outside, because it just seemed like drama just was thrust upon me in high school. And then in college, it was kind of the same thing. I was always looking forward to the classes where I got to make music or got to study music, even if it was from a scientific point of view. So yeah, those are my favorite memories. I actually have a picture of my high school band in my office to remind me like of my love of music. So let's get into our first video. This is Warriors from Where the Love Is.
No pressure. No pressure. Yeah. We are warriors. Yeah. We
so that was Warriors by Where the Love Is, aka Dale Novella and Mikal Amin. I hope y'all enjoyed that. And so our first question is interesting. It touches on a problem that I've seen or I've experienced. I've heard a lot of people talk about in all levels of education, right? Classroom size. And so I wanted to hear from the panel, what is the pros and cons of having a large classroom size?
All right, I'm going to jump in on this one because I feel pretty strongly about it. The first thing that's jumping to my mind are cons. And I think the main issue that I see with large classroom sizes is that they create an obstacle for fostering really deep relationships with your students. It's just a matter of numbers. When you have 34 kids in your class, you don't have as much time to connect with them individually and to really build those relationships. And in my opinion, relationships, that is at the core of education. That's at the core of receiving a good education, is having a strong relationship between the student and teacher. And when there's so many kids, you can't do that as effectively.
Yes, I agree. Thank you for that, Nicole.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. And personally, I actually, in the going on 16 years as a teaching artist and putting programs in school and after school, I've yet to really see any pros of large groupings of students in a public school setting. Typically, when you have large groups of students, the resources, both in terms of human resources, that is teachers, paras, co-teachers, is not sufficient for those size groups. Oftentimes, materials and supplies, whether it be books, pens, paper, art materials, computers, never seems to be enough. And also, to kind of go a little further into Nicole's point, which I fully agree with, the idea of those relationships, it also creates a very large stress on the teacher as well, which just creates kind of like an echo chamber loop. Because you do have teachers that do strive to try and develop those relationships with students and try to meet the very specific needs of each individual student. That becomes increasingly harder when you have large groups, because the learning levels, the development levels are all varied and different. So it's very challenging for any adult or any person that is trying to facilitate for young people, if they have to do that for 25, 35, 40 students at a time. So I be very honest, the only pros I've seen is if you're coming from more of like a capitalist or banking model, where you're just trying to get as many students in the door as possible, and you're trying to fulfill these quotas. In my instance, in non-for-profit, the more students that you're serving, the way that the algorithms or the formulas work for foundations often is like, well, we want to serve the most students. So if you're in that mode of thinking and in that attitude and way of thinking, then for you, as many students in a classroom as possible is a pro. But I think from a human standpoint, it absolutely isn't, and oftentimes is very highly, to put it lightly, ineffectual for education, but it's highly toxic from a very human perspective, in my opinion.
I'll jump in. So on one hand, I see more opportunities for engagement, more personalities, more ideas to be able to travel across the room. Then you also have to manage all of those things too, which can be difficult as a teacher. And I just find that the more prepared you are beforehand, the more success you're more likely to have as a teacher if you're trying to account for all these things. I also think, like on the con side, in addition to managing the personalities, you also have to think of the physical space itself. So I teach students 16 to 21 years of age, right? So it's just not possible to fit 34 of them into one class. You just don't have enough space. It's not like we're dealing with kindergartners, right? So I think that's something that a lot of people may not think about. Can you actually fit all of these seats and people in the class? And if you do, is the place going to explode?
It probably will.
I don't have much to add other than just saying what Mikal brought up about like the fallacy of the pro, right? The fallacious pro of the numbers, the capitalist kind of like get them in there, and we're presupposing or creating this metric, and we're in doing so, we're presupposing that this is a positive, right? As opposed to not there is no real objectivity there. It's, oh no, this is a pro. We're serving the most students, but we haven't really thought deeply on what that actually means, and the how, and you know, if you want to say control groups or just reflection and beyond just data, what that actually entails. I mean, it's not like we haven't had, oh, I don't know, 50 years of evidence on this, but you know, if we had 50 years of evidence, it might help.
Yeah. For David and Mikal, those of y'all have facilitated after school programs with schools like from the ground up, right? So do you feel that pressure to bring in a bunch of students even when you're against that?
Listen, absolutely. No, and you know, I spent about 4 to 5 years solely as a teaching artist. So I feel and understand it from the ground level, in being in a school and being told that I need a certain amount of students to maintain the residency. That if I couldn't sustain a certain number of students, then I would no longer be able to teach there because I couldn't justify that workshop being there. Now imagine you as an adult walking into a school. These students don't know you. They don't know what you're going to be bringing and providing. They have no real way to begin to develop that level of trust or excitement with you. And you're thrown into a cafeteria during lunchtime. Or you're asked to speak for 2 minutes in front of a class that kind of is barely paying attention because everybody's walking in. Some students might love this teacher and love this class. Others just might be there just to be there. The school's culture might be chaotic in general. And now you have to sell yourself to these students who they don't know you from Adam 30 seconds ago. Then I've also now, for the last 10 years, going on 11, been on the administrative side where I've had to sit with foundation managers that basically maintain the funds and answering questions on, well, is this really a value for the $500,000 or the $1.5 million we're spending? Because we only see that you're having 8 students, and having to sit with these individuals and explain that it's not about the quantity, but it's the quality. And what we're looking to do is have these, going back to what Nicole said, which was so real, this deep relationship with young people to help them develop further. And the challenges that has when you can't do that because of the size of the students. I also am just a really big advocate of, listen, if a young person isn't feeling what's going on, I don't want to force them to do it. If they don't want to write, if they don't want to rap, if they don't want to do poetry, if they don't want to dance, it doesn't make sense to me to have them continue in something they don't enjoy. But if you have 3 or 4 or 6, and maybe you will have 15 or 20, whatever the number. But what you want is you want to have young people that are prepared, wanting and willing to have a deep investment in whatever it is they're doing, especially if it's an after-school program or it's something like the arts. But it's so in the non-for-profit sector, and I'll cut off and let David speak. But it's so tied. The money is so tied to numbers in a very unhealthy and unrealistic way, because there's so many things that are required and needed to sustain that relationship with students, and even to start that relationship with students, that the numbers and all of the formulas just don't take that into account. And most foundations and most funders of non-for-profits, they're really very, very high up in the clouds somewhere, and they're not really close to these communities of young people. They're not close to these communities inside schools. So they have a very unrealistic and not holistic picture of actually what's really going to benefit the students that they claim to want to serve and help.
So I just want to pull out some things that he said, because I don't have anything new to add there. It's just top down, square peg, round hole. And there was a third one that will come to me. The pressure from, the top brass of recruitment, which then leads to the third thing, right? The salesmanship of it, and the discomfort of that, hoping that this thing that you're trying to paint, this portrait you're trying to paint in front of these complete strangers to you and you to them, matches what you're selling, but your heart believes in what you're saying, but at the same time you're motivated by the pressure of the top down kind of quality that is inflicted upon you. So then it becomes, what am I doing? And then just the square peg round hole, 50 years of education, whatever, of how responsive can we actually be to the needs of the moment, and I'm looking at, in terms of Kwame and Nicole, two people who I've seen in real time be responsive to the needs of their students in the moment. And I won't speak to anything beyond that. If did they feel supported by their principal or what? That's a whole. But just public school teachers in general, and friends of mine in the public school system in general. Like how great is it to feel supported by your principal or your assistant principals, right? Your leadership team, and how deflating and debilitating it is. And in some cases, me, nonprofit, like. This lowly coordinator or whatever, like how intimidating it is to feel that weight from the top brass that you must hit these numbers. And it's not really about I know what the program description said, but here's what these students, as Mikal was alluding or saying, like here's what they're interested in. And we have capacity and capability to actually meet this. No, but we need to see X, Y, and Z. And that's that crappy dance that's always there. I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you. And we've talked a bunch about like this capitalist viewpoint where like we got to get the numbers in because we have to make this certain amount of money, or like I want my money to be accounted for, right? But are there other causes for a large classroom size?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways you could look at it. Picking up on what Dave and Mikal said, as an administrator, you could think about it as lessening the strain on your budget on one hand. All right. So as an administrator, when you get your funding, you could think about it you could either staff your school with more teachers and social workers, things of that sort, or you can choose to use the money other ways. You can use it for more resources for the students, trips, enrichment, things of that nature. But the bottom line is whenever you have less teachers in the building, you're going to have larger class sizes. Another thing to think about is, in this climate, who's really running to become a teacher? Who wants to do that? You look at the thanklessness, you look at the disrespect, and you say, I don't want any part of that. So that could lead to a dearth of teachers as well. So whenever you don't have teachers in the building, you're naturally going to have larger class sizes.
Not to mention the pay, because commensurate with the amount of work that you do as an educator, as a teacher, especially in public schools. My father was a public school teacher for about 35 years. And there's so many hours that you are not accounted for. I have friends of mine that are teachers as well, and it's like people think, oh, your day starts at 8 and ends at 3. It's like, no, day starts at 6, ends at like 9 p.m. Mm-hmm. That's actually like a typical teacher's day, between the curriculum, development, getting lessons ready for the next day, grading papers, grading quizzes, grading tests, prepping those things. All of those things are not accounted for in the salaries and the pay that teachers get, even with a really great and strong union for the most part. So yeah, why would I it's kind of like what they say, in the hood with like drug dealers and like Mickey D's. It's like, why would I go work at Mickey D's? You know what I mean? For, $5 an hour when I can, hustle on the corner and make 4 times that in like third of the time. It's kind of similar being a teacher. I might as well go into the private sector, make 6 figures, elevate, have more benefits for my family, than go to a job where I may not make, and this also kind of applies to non-for-profit as well, where like my earning potential is vastly, vastly stunted, and I'm not even appreciated for the work I'm doing that's critical and necessary to society at large. That's not even acknowledged, even in a just a symbolic way. So yeah, I definitely, and it's a crisis that's been going on for decades now. And some of the best and brightest people that could really help young people benefit are smart enough to know, like, well, why would I go into an industry in a field that doesn't value my skills, doesn't value my time, doesn't value what I have to offer, and getting it from administrators, getting it from parents, and also, getting it from students, because of the culture, the very toxic culture that the adults and the people in power have created inside of the United States in general with our education system. It's been eroding for a while, like as David keeps bringing up, 50 years down the line, it's ridiculous.
Like, I know we're gonna get there, Dale. I don't actually want this answered, but it's just like, why are we're still having this conversation? Like, our parents, were, if they weren't having it directly, they were privy to this conversation. Why are we still having this conversation generations later? You know what I mean? And why is it still deteriorating? But anyway.
And real quick, shouts to teachers and those that work directly with students, the guidance counselors, the social workers, the people that help keep the school running, like the janitors and the people that handle the food and things like that, and the students, because they're the ones that are impacted by all of these negative things, and they have the least control and agency in that. So the problem isn't with teachers. It isn't with that staff that's trying to make sure that there's a safe, healthy environment for those young people. And it certainly doesn't fall on those young people at all. It really is the decisions that the powers that be that have created this educational system choose to continue to ignore. And really, to be quite honest with you, just lack imagination and innovation to think about how can we do this better and differently and create environments that are nurturing and that are, for lack of a better term right now, nutritional and valuable for everyone involved, not just those young people, but the teachers as well, and the parents as well. And, we have a really great opportunity if people were more imaginative and had a different degree of character to really make education in schools the center for a really strong community that helps all of us understand critical thinking, creative thinking, developing compassion, empathy, modeling a lot of the things to help us develop as human beings. A huge generator and center for that can be schools. Because aside from your parents, those are the places, school is the place where you begin to really maybe not learn those values, but those values are reinforced, they're enhanced, they're developed. And we're failing at that, and we've been failing at that. And it's no fault or very little fault of teachers, and definitely no fault of students. It really falls in line with those individuals that continue to maintain this sort of top-down, David was saying, this top-down sort of system, this banking system that's just not work. It doesn't work.
And further values, emotional intelligence, character development, practical skill, introduction and development, that some of that we've definitely lost as well. Living skills that students can use in the real world. I think my final point on this is in terms of why we're still having this conversation. I'm actually sick of this. We spend more than any developed nation on education, but what is it guiding us? Like the imagination that Mikal's talking about. That's it. Like you can't throw money at the problem, right? You actually have to give a damn and be thoughtful about multiple aspects of this, including tracing your steps back to how we got here and tracing your steps back to why we maintain this and who benefits from the maintenance of this over time. And I don't, and that's not, I mean, it is inherently political, but it's not like a political talking point to me. That's what it is, so the imagination as well, not just the money.
Yeah. Nicole, did you want to speak on that?
Yes. I loved what both of you are saying. So many points. I feel like my head is just on a bobble, like agreeing with everything that you're saying. Because I think there's this larger question of like reimagining the school system. How can we really step outside of the box to rethink what the structure of school looks like? Because like David said, just throwing money at the problem is not going to fix it. This has been going on for how many decades now, and we're still essentially in the same position. And when you look at even if you look at the structure of a school day, the way that it's set up, school is supposedly preparing you for the real world, which, what does that even mean? You're already in the real world, but let's say it's preparing you for adult life. You have to be there at a certain time. When the bell rings, you need to be in your seat doing work, and you work till the next bell. And then you have 2 minutes, and then you go to your next class, and you have the amount of time that you have for lunch or free time is much shorter than your other class periods. There's very little to no time to go outside. What job is like that? What job puts you in on a bell, and if you're 1 minute late, then you're penalized? This system
Amazon,
right? Like, but that's what it is. Like, this system was created to make people complacent, to make them conform, and to really kind of stamp out creativity. And it's just like, that's not what we're looking for. But when the overall structure is so micromanaged, then of course, like, the same results are going to happen. Like, I think there just needs to be a complete restructuring of the whole system, including what's being taught, the way the days are being structured, how many adults, like the resources, all of it. So I love that this idea of like imaginative, like how can we be imaginative with the school system is being brought up.
Yeah, that leads us to our next question. What is the ideal setup for each of you for your classrooms, whether you're teaching in the classroom or you're taking a class?
Well, I want to touch on that, but before I touch on that, I wanted to just add one more thing to the discussion that was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever, like as a teacher, whenever you're trying to plan something, you're oftentimes asked what's best for the kids. So I ask the same question here: what's going to benefit the kids the most? And I know that when students come for interviews at my school, one common thing that I hear from a lot of them is that they felt like a number, or they felt unseen at their old comprehensive high school. So they want to come someplace where they're going to have smaller class sizes, a smaller learning environment, so that they can feel like a person, right? So I think about things that happen in my school that help build community and help students become seen. And I don't know if things like that happen in larger schools. Like there's this one time where probably about 7-8 years ago now, we had a student named Nell Cash. You could find him on Spotify. Shout out to my guy, Nell Cash, right? He was putting out a mixtape. And we were heavily anticipating this mixtape in the school because it had been delayed a couple times. So whenever he's walking through the hallway, hey, Vanell, when's the mixtape coming? I'm working on it, right? If he's in a larger school, I don't know how many people know about this mixtape, right? And finally, when the release date came for this mixtape, actually like a couple of days before, one of the teachers got an idea, you know what, why don't we do like an album release party for Vanell in the cafeteria? So we got a cake and we brought all the students to the cafeteria for the last period, and we had cake and we listened to Vanell's music. And it was a great communal moment. And it's because we have like 150 students in my school. If you have 350, 400, I don't know if Vanell gets that recognition and has that moment. And then I don't know if I'm making it probably is a bad segue, but then I'll jump into the other one about the classroom setup now.
I mean, that's kind of that kind of ties in. Like, that's your ideal education setup. It might not be the specific classroom, but something that's communal, something that feels like you're part of something, like an education experience where you know everyone there, and it's like it's all love, right? So support.
Yes, that's pretty much what it does look like. Like uh, for the physical setup, students they don't like rows because they get test anxiety when they see rows. They
Mm.
prefer pairs, three, small groups, right? When they see a big circle, some sort of circle, then they get speaking or discussion anxiety too, right?
Oh.
So sometimes that could happen. But from the physical space, like I said, they like pairs, they like small groups, they like visual aids and charts for guidance. They basically just like to know that there are resources and scaffolds in place to help them. Because just think of as an adult, when you're sitting in on some sort of, I don't know, it could be some sort of training and you're lost and you're like, I don't really know why I'm sitting here. I don't know what I'm doing here. Just imagine being a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old feeling lost in school every day, right? So I guess, just wrapping it up, it's the small groups for community and visual aids.
Yes, thank you, Kwame.
I love that you touched on the physical setup of the room, because I think that's so important and a lot of times maybe not as emphasized. And even just having things like, I would have like string lights over the board, a little sign on the door that says, "You are welcome here," another one inside, "You are loved," like just making them feel seen and cherished, I think is really important. And as far as the classroom setup, in terms of curriculum, I think a little bit of a scale back on some of the curriculum, some of the testing that's done, so that there's more room to interact, to build relationships. Like Kwame, you mentioned about having the listening party with your students with the release of his album. More time for things like that, where we can connect with one another, is really important.
Yeah.
For me, first of all, agree on all fronts. For me, a mix of the creative with the instructive, but not instructive as in, let's learn about George Washington or whatever. I mean, instructive in terms of kind of historical nuggets to how we got here, and it touches a little bit on the last question. Like, I'm hearing us say out loud, and obviously I'm in agreement with it. Like imagination and creativity. And the pragmatic kind of look at things is in the era of deregulation, union busting. Um, I mean, yeah, factory jobs kind of obviously closed along with that in Middle America, but it's essentially, Nicole, you hit the nail on the head. To wipe out creativity, to kind of pat it down and create these complacent and willing automatons who know how to conform without it necessarily being explicit. So what I would love to see, at least theoretically or big picture, is a mix of the room for the interpersonal and intrapersonal creativity and exploration, that human development, the values that Mikal mentioned earlier, with also and practical, manual kind of skills and whatnot, but with also like nuggets on, even if just modern, even if it's just shouldn't be just, but even if it's just modern history, like that, how we got here and why is it important that I, teacher, am telling and or going through this with you, student, about the tamping down of creativity and why we focus on it here in our particular school or in our particular district, in our particular community, why you are actually an exemplar, an advocate, an ambassador for the next row of whether it's your younger brother or younger siblings, or you're going to carry this through. So we want you to explicitly have an awareness of, obviously not go in the weeds with everything, but have an explicit awareness of the dynamic that led up to now, and what we, ideally are working on with you here, and what we hope this can lead to in the future. So I would love to see something like that.
Mikal Amin, do you have an idea?
I might. To be honest with you, everything that everyone has said really kind of encompasses what I'm thinking about. Kwame, with his examples with his students and creating and maintaining a culture and a community where those young people can be seen, they can be celebrated and appreciated. The things that Nicole was specifically talking about with the curriculum and sort of the myth of testing as necessary, and really thinking about what are the things that young people need to learn about. I really have had a lot of time to think about this, and I don't know if I have the actual answer, but a lot of what I'm thinking about is from the macro level. So everything we've already discussed, we're talking about small classroom sizes, 1-to-5 ratio of students, 1 educator, 5 students, 7 tops, thinking more of kind of like a small liberal arts model. In addition to that, there's other kind of alternative schools that actually have teams. So you'll have several healthcare professionals, counselor, social worker, that basically work as a group for the holistic of the student. I'm imagining a school it's very small, but it would be very local and communal. But the ideas would be that this child wouldn't just be working with a traditional teacher. They'd also be working with someone who is tending to their emotional needs. There's also someone that would have family resources if they would need them to be able to reach out to. The diet within the school itself for their breakfast, their lunch would also be a part of that as well. The school would actually be more democratic and communal in terms of decisions made about certain things, with students and parents more directly involved. I don't know how that would fully work, but it wouldn't be simply a superintendent and a principal with maybe some vice principals and deans kind of having a say. Everyone is going to have a collective discussion around these things. And I think that it would be possible if the schools were smaller, if we're dealing with smaller kind of like community enclaves or satellites of schools. The other thing from a more micro perspective for me, it really is going back to, what we used to call a classical education. So it would be history, humanities, math, but also arts, science as well. I wouldn't even have standard testing. I wouldn't even have that integrated into what I'm thinking and seeing. But most importantly, inside the curriculum, what I would also move away from and move towards is this idea of practice and praxis. So everything that they're learning can be directly applicable to the real world. So if you're learning math, if you're learning science, it's rooted in things that they actually can see and experience on a day-to-day, so that it's something that they're not there's so many things I realized that I've lost that I've learned because much of it wasn't applicable, and I've had to kind of relearn it in adult life when those things have arisen. So what does it look like if basically, and I think there's a alternative school in New York City as school that loosely kind of does some of those types of things. But the idea of this curriculum where it's like, if we're learning history, it is directly connected to a reality that you know. If we're dealing with science, we're dealing with math, the principles and the ideas and those things are rooted in real world examples, things that when they step outside of those school walls, they can easily apply those things into what their daily life is. I think there's a better chance for them retaining it. I think it's a better chance of them being invested in it. So all of those things is what like a school, what I would love the schools to look like. And those things, in my opinion, we kind of gone ad nauseum about this, but I don't believe those things can really be implemented effectively if you have a school size of like 500 kids and you have 25 staff that are the educators and they don't have support themselves. I think that we have to think about, okay, how local, if there's a neighborhood of several thousand students, are there smaller enclaves of say 7 or 8 sort of satellite pod schools that these children go to? So that they can get that holistic. I'm really thinking about a school that has a more holistic approach for young people as well as the educators, and that's from every level, and it's fully inclusive in how things are kind of move forward.
Yeah, I love all of these ideas, and I was thinking about just like the idea. I'm standing right now. I'm usually standing at my desk, and like the idea that like you have standing desk, or I know Nicole had like little stools that the students could like roll around in. Like the rolly chair wasn't reserved for just the teacher; there were rolly chairs for the students, and there was a bean bag in the back if you worked better from there, and just like different places you could sit in your classroom to work, because not some of us kind of just fall asleep when we're sitting for too long, which I'm definitely one of those people. But also, when you're standing up, you're closer to God. And that brings us to Gabriel Ramirez with John/God.
So, I have a brother. His name is John. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia in 2013. And, society and media likes to portray people who suffer from mental illness and have these like diseases as like criminals, murderers, dangerous, crazy people. And my brother was like he thought he was Jesus, right? And the voices in his head were God. So he would deadass like roll up on you and be like, "Yo, bro, you're beautiful, you're perfect, I love you, you going to heaven. Boom, I just sent you up." Right? And like my brother would come home like, "Yo, my nigga, dead ass, I baptized like 1,500 people with the holy fire, bro. Like, yeah, like, yo, New York City is lit right now. We all going to heaven." Like, he'd be hyped like that, right? Yeah, like, it's shit, right? And, he also was paranoid, right? He'd hear helicopters, right? And when he'd pray, he heard snakes. And this is a poem, and obviously about my brother and like the mental institutions, right? That we like put some of our family members in, and some people choose to forget about them, and some of them ride it out, right? So this is a poem about my brother. 5 doctors sit prepared to evaluate my brother John to see if he can be released from the psych ward. The first doctor asked, "How are you?" John says, "Well," says, "breakfast," cocked neck, face implying he tasted crushed pills in his scrambled eggs. He chuckled at the powder residue on his fork. "Y'all ain't never heard? A man who laughs at poison knows he won't be dying soon." The second doctor asked, "Are you nervous?" John says no, while tapping his foot. He wants to stomp on the snakes creeping toward him, but doesn't want to alert the doctors. They already know. He hears hissing choirs, slimy, wingless angels, biting their toxins into his faith. My brother prayed himself anti-venom, could thrust fangs further into him. The doctors would call this a suicide attempt when he'd be showing how full of life he is. The third, "What do you think of our facility?" John doesn't speak at first. Wonders if there's a cross waiting to be carried, or if one of the doctors needs to be baptized. Says he helps the patients more than the staff. Says the staff are like family members who wish they weren't there. Says they're always in the way. John's heart is full of interrupted prayers. Half a heaven coursing through my brother's body, and people want to call him crazy. The fourth, "Have you had any delusion?" John shrugs. Says nothing of the angels surrounding the chandelier. Says nothing about how he can feel his brain cracking. He is one of God's knuckles, one of God's works in progress. He knows assembling his fingers into vices would only bring about the hunt. He settles down before making a spectacle of the Messiah in him. He can't stop his hands and feet from bleeding, but will bear the sin of the last doctor asking, "What does all of that even mean?" John shakes his head. He doesn't want the doctors to know he could dispel demons with a cocked neck, how he can nail himself to a cross, call it practice. They say he is unhinged, a cathedral of teeth, always one step away from driving his fist down someone's throat. They want to see an animal make a home of the cage they were thrown in, when none of these doctors have held thorns until their palms became sponges soaked in their Savior's blood. All they know of my brother is Beth Israel Medical Center, 11th floor, psych ward, Abilify, Ativan, Chlorzel, John, Ramirez.
All right, that was Gabriel Ramirez with John/God. So it might have seemed strange to play that poem in a bit about education, especially if you've never worked in education. Those of us do know that schizophrenia is like extreme on all the cases that we have to deal with in public school system, right? Like there's a bunch of other things, a bunch of other mental illnesses. I don't even know all the names now. Like there's a bunch of other issues that you could have an IEP for, and so on and so forth. But the way it's handled is also always is usually poorly. And I wanted specifically around wellness, and we can get wellness for I guess I can say like typical or neurotypical students, and also students that may have other issues going on regardless of what they are. How has wellness been handled in your experience in the public school system or in the school system in general?
I think that poem was a perfect segue into this topic. And when you ask that, how is wellness handled? My first thought is like, it's kind of not. It's not handled in the way that it should be, at least. It's like the attention really goes onto a student's mental well-being in an intense way. If they're not doing well in classes, if they're not performing academically, then it's like, well, now we need to actually support this student. And that's not to say that there isn't support for them otherwise. There is, and depending on the school, there's varying levels of that. But when it comes to the wellness of both educators and students, it's just not a priority. It's not, because if it was, there would be more time dedicated to it and there would be more money allocated for student well-being. So I think just following the money on that one kind of gives you your answer that it's not a top priority, at least not in the way that it should be, in my opinion.
Yes. Thank you, Nicole.
My first thought was wellness, school, you know.
That doesn't mix.
Yeah. You know, teachers looked out for me for sure. I mean, teachers looked out for me. Essentially, that in a way was what wellness was. I don't know if they saw something specific. You know, I had familial tragedy when I was younger, and teachers looked out for me. But I don't know in terms of infrastructurally, and that's really what comes to my mind too. Infrastructure, both physical and whatever, figurative or whatever. I don't know. I will say that there's one thing that also came to mind with your last question that does tie into this question regarding infrastructure. And it sounds silly to say it, but let's be real. In New York City, we can talk about small schools and small class sizes, which we are and we should. There's a lot of old pre-war monstrosity school buildings, like physical, and I mean it when I'm saying this, physical structures that were built at a time that had a functionality for that time, that no longer quite serve what in my estimation, what we're talking about here. So, and you know, it's not like we're going to get HGTV to come and redo all these buildings, but I wonder if there is a mechanism in place, you know, like again, blue sky or whatever you want to call it, thinking, green, almost a la New Deal-ish, where in some cases where you are able to, sure, tear them down if you're able to, but really, and when you're able to build new ones that don't resemble the ones we see now, but the ones that do exist, what can be done? Going back to Mikal's point, with student input, familial input, right? To reimagine, to redesign the interiors of these things, to get it more green, to create more, and I know it's not easy, all right? But like to create, whether it's gardens on the roof or vines and ivy along the sides, you know, or out the window, get something like that. Like If certain walls can be, I know it's concrete for a lot of them, but if certain walls or pillars can be knocked out or redecorated, what can actually be done? And one of the reasons that came up, and I'll stop with this, I saw a random interview this morning, and now I don't even need to mention the interview; it's not important. But what resonated from the interview and someone's specific comment was this, and I was like, "Oh, this is life." Okay, the person was like, "I read somewhere that all you really need are three things: something to do, something to look forward to, and someone to love." I was like, "Yo." And if we give students that within a school setting, within the school mechanism, something to do, something to look forward to. And I know the love can be a little iffy in different contexts, but like things to love or expression of love within self and each other. I wonder what physical and figurative infrastructure, but really just for now, focusing on the physical things. We're not going to tear down all these big ass buildings. What can be done within them?
Yeah, thank you. That does make me think, like, just like the physical structures, how therapies like pet therapy help students with different needs, right? And having that available to, I mean, it's already a problem that they're taking arts out of that art has been taken out of schools for the most part. That's already a problem where it has helped so many people for so many different reasons. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm a hippie. Like, could schools have petting zoos? Like, can we have a petting zoo? Like, even for high school students, you know? Yeah.
Maybe until a kid comes down with a bad allergy to a cat or something like that.
I was thinking like pigs.
Whoa.
You know, how many New York City students have seen pigs?
That aren't on their plate? Not many.
Bacon, egg, and cheese. Bacon, egg, and cheese.
Right. Do you know what your bacon, egg, and cheese is made out of? It's this. Yeah.
I think that this is a really tricky topic because just like with physical health, when it comes to mental health, we look at the symptoms more than the cause a lot of times, right? So you might see someone who might be acting peculiar from your perspective, but you don't know why. And then even if you do figure out what it is, how do you address it? Like how do you combat homelessness, right? How do you combat childhood trauma?
Yeah.
So I think as a teacher, we've been taught to refer. Like when you see something, you say like, okay, talk to the social worker, talk to the guidance counselor, talk to your administration. But I don't know if I've been in trainings where they say, okay, maybe this is what you can do. This is what a guidance counselor might do. So maybe you can try this too on a smaller level.
Mikal, do you have thoughts?
Can I just jump in real with one more thing because that triggered, man. Well, I don't want to come at this from a defeatist standpoint, but I also don't want to look at schools as the everything of child development, right? Because it is a fostering of different villages being at home, at school, you know, your grandparents, if you're fortunate enough to have grandparents and so on and so forth. It's these instances. But part of basically the point I'm getting at is parents, for the most part, you can't work one job to sustain your whole family anymore. Those days are done, right? And those have ripple effects over these generations that we're talking about, over these decades that we're talking about. And it's incumbent on, you know, families to to obviously advocate for selves and each other, but there's already so much burden placed on teachers, and in some respects school officials. Like part of it is becoming I'm not going to articulate this well, like in the way I want to, but like in a way politically active or at least advocacy aware and active on quality of life, just for you know, an work opportunities or just opportunities period for development, whether it's through work or other means for youth, and how that ripples into the public school system. So like what Kwame said just kind of made me go into that direction as well.
And now, Mikal.
I don't really have anything to add. It's really just ditto. I mean, everyone kind of really touched upon things that I would have touched upon as well. I think a lot of stuff is going to be very like yes and so yeah. I don't think that wellness is really handled very well for students, for staff, and I think, you know, as David pointed out, the physical structures aren't there to be had. You know, Kwame and Nicole touched on more of the mental and emotional sides of those things. Um, but the overarching thing that I feel like we're just all talking about is sort of this deteriorating and decaying failure school system we're already seeing the negative effects, but we haven't fully paid those costs yet, and that's coming. I mean, to be honest with you, to be very blunt about it, I directly feel that a huge reason why we were able to have a Trump presidency is because we have such a horrible school system, because we no longer have the ability to help individuals understand media literacy, emotional literacy, and all of those things over time have kind of created sort of this very deep hole and gap in, you know, development of human beings. And all of that applies to not just being like, okay, the school is clean, okay, we don't have you know, unstable adults with the students. It's all of that and more. And again, I think that for a lot of reasons, the powers that be, those administrators, superintendents, chancellors, they've failed miserably to really address and answer those things, and they've passed that cost on to their staff, teachers, and, you know, other individuals that support students, and then it ultimately leads to the students not being able to in mass. I mean, obviously we have young people that are tremendous, amazing, and thrive regardless. But my hope is that it's a mass, and it is tied to that wellness. So, yeah, everything everybody said is pretty much what I would have said. Totally, just agree with everybody's kind of feel on it.
I want everyone to feel like empowered with saying and yes and. I know David, being in theater, is very used to the yes and. The yes and is celebrated. But there's nothing wrong with like agreeing with the rest of the panel, especially because like if we're all agreeing and we're talking about changes in education, then like there should be changes in education. We all come from like different backgrounds, different like perspectives. Some of us come, well, I think 3 of us came from different schools, but David and Kwame have a school in common. So, you know, all of these things, if we're all saying yes and, it's like, hopefully the powers that be will shift soon. But speaking about backgrounds, part of my background is I am the stereotypical gifted and talented kid, not the stereotypical gifted and talented kid. People always say that like the gifted and talented kids end up like homeless on the street or something because no one's telling them that they're special anymore. It's like you got out of high school and then you realize you were just like everybody else. You were just reading a little better in 3rd grade, you know. But there are tons of these programs, right? You take a test, they're like, you're gifted, and they send you off to an advanced class. But you only take that advanced class for a couple periods of the day or blocks of the day, and then you are with the rest of your classmates of your age, right? It's not like you skip a whole grade and you kind of integrate into that, or everyone from this level is in one grade. And then there are IEPs, right? Individual education plans, which if I didn't say that acronym right, that's what I thought it was. That's right. Okay, awesome. Where I usually are given to students who are struggling for whatever reason. Right? Are these types of programs beneficial? Have they been? Are they not? Should there be a reform with these programs?
Maybe I can speak about the IEP side of things. Like as far as that goes, all the teachers in the city have access to the students' IEPs, but I don't know how many people are actually checking them out. A lot of times, you run into danger in the classroom because you didn't read the IEP. So I know I use the IEP more so for the social emotional aspect, because I want to know what triggers a kid so that I don't shut them off or turn things into a powder keg. Like, as far as the academic things, what can they do? What do they struggle with? That stuff is pretty easy to find out early on. But for the social emotional stuff, you don't know a lot of times until it's too late. So I prefer to know beforehand.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I think Kwame brings up a really good point about, especially with the social emotional aspects, IEPs are very helpful. I think IEPs in general and gifted programs, I loved what you shared, Dale, because I was a part of that narrative of like, I'm gifted, I'm special. And then I got to college and it was like, no, you're not, you're just like everyone else. But I think IEPs and gifted programs, they are very well intentioned, and they really just feed into the system that is like IEPs. The focus of those are really fitting students with disabilities to conform to neurotypical or able-bodied standards. Like, this is what's wrong with you or what you're lacking. How can we make it so that you can fit into like what's considered normal, as opposed to looking at how can we make the environment better for you? Like, how can we look at it not from what can we change or shift within you, but what can we do like externally, if that makes sense. So I think they are helpful for the system that is, but in a lot of ways they can, depending on the educator or the teacher, like I have seen circumstances where a teacher looks at an IEP and might write off a student, or even just judge them, or just have this preconceived idea of what the student is going to do or what they're going to be like, and judge them, and also just have biases towards those students based on what's in the IEP. That's not the norm, but I have seen it. So I think that's a really important factor to consider also. It can create stigma.
Yeah.
And that's real. Like, I don't have any new ideas to contribute other than what was already shared, but to harp on that. Obviously, that we have praise for teachers on this podcast. This is a teacher-friendly podcast. This is a safe space for teachers. And at the same time, let's also remember that teachers are human beings too. So let's not pretend like their bias doesn't exist. So I completely agree with that notion. So on both levels, right? And I've seen it kind of, again, a preconceived narrative based on whether it's specifically an IEP or a set of behaviors over a course of a few weeks, or maybe even the previous school year, as if students don't change, as if they're not actively changing, right? And maturing. And also the notion, the gifted and talented notion. As you were asking the question, Dale, I was thinking about the time where I was offered hashtag no humble brag, but I was offered to skip, I think, 7th grade, and I did go to a small school, so I was with the same students for the most part from kindergarten, but for real, from like 4th grade through 8th grade. And part of the reason I didn't was those kids were bigger. I don't know any of them. I knew the kids I knew. And I'm sure there would have been, it was well intentioned. I'm sure that in a way would have been good for me. I don't know if socially it would have been, but it would have been good for me in other ways. But what Nicole was talking about was feeding into the system as it is. This kind of, I don't want to sound like I'm taking an extremist look at it, but class stratification or disparities, the haves, the have-nots, those with resources and those who don't, and then the hard reality, as both of you alluded to, when you get to college or whatever, it's like, oh, I'm just another person, you know what I mean? But there is this kind of, again, well-intended belief of like, you're special, and I think in some form or fashion, all of us hold that nugget to want to pass that onto every student that we come into contact with. You're special, and at what point, and I can also hear the rabble rouser. Well, everyone gets a trophy. Like the liberals just want everyone to. I don't know if there's something inherently wrong with gifted and talented, but at the same time, how can we, again, lay out the landscape? How can we just tell truth in education and do it in a nuanced manner? So maybe it's not necessarily, hey, you're better than these students, but we recognize something in you. That's, I don't know, that's in these specific ways. These qualities stand out in you, so we want to put you in a situation that we think can develop and nurture those qualities. And maybe just admit we're not doing a good enough job, or the circumstances are different for some other students. But just have some freaking nuance and truth telling in education, rather than setting people up to be disappointed later on.
So, gifted and talented alum here. Advanced
Well,
placement.
you are gifted and talented, but I'm biased.
You are biased. Understood. And I very much had the same experience that Nicole had. What you had, Nicole. It was, oh look, no cap. I took college courses the summers between my 8th grade year and my freshman year of college, or freshman year of high school. Excuse me. And when I got to college, I'd had AP History, I'd had AP English. I was lost in my first Literature 101 class because it was woeful. And I'm saying all that to say, and also additionally with the IEPs, because I've experienced that as well through my programs, where there's a stigmatism to students around them. And the reality of it is that's literally just a roadmap to help support a young person, and also to support that educator to ensure that they are doing what they need to do and can understand how to best help and support that student. The word I'm thinking of is consistency. There's no consistency across the board on either side of these. One, how IEPs are implemented, what are the standards for those things. I've spoken directly myself in my personal experience with parents that have felt that the IEPs were simply just ways to kind of mark their child as like a behavioral problem. And yet there was just not a real full understanding of what the IEP was supposed to do, largely because, to what Kwame was saying earlier, there's a lot of teachers that don't read it. They actually don't sit down with the individuals that create those IEPs and go over those things or get clarity on what they need to do or how to kind of implement what's in those plans. On the flip side, in terms of with gifted and talented programs, they're wildly varied. What I would love to see is if they're, going back a little further to when we were talking about like our ideal school, if there was just a place where if a young person felt that they wanted to develop further or were looking for more challenges, they can enter into within a school, this program and or track, but it would require some better way of measure or metric to determine what those young people are capable of. I tend to be biased with young people. I kind of feel like they all start out really high and great. And then we just kind of do things in society to just kind of like beat them down. So in my mind, it's almost like if there is a gifted and talented program, it would have to be done in a way that doesn't also stigmatize students and create this hierarchy, because that's what these things kind of do. And it limits the idea of what is considered gifted and talented in a student. Like, how do you measure that? What's your definition of that? How are you saying this student is gifted and this one is not? What like different types of intelligences are you even looking at and measuring to determine those things? And do you have environments that can hit all of those different types of intelligences? You might be a genius in things that are kinesthetic. You might not be able to do things necessarily from a writing perspective, but you might be a genius with things that are tactile and movement. But there's no program that's gifted and talented in a formal school system that says, well, you know what? You're a genius in this. You're profound in this. Here's the resources for you to take that to as far the level as you want. So it's sort of the consistency, and again, just the imagination to rethink that, and then also to destigmatize what we understand of IEPs and to get a better way of like really having everyone, student, parent, teacher, administrator buy-in. And I think that could happen if there was just some consistency around it. Like, how are these things created? Why are they created? Why are they implemented? Why is it beneficial? Why is it necessary? And having those things sort of kind of play out that way. And just to flatten this hierarchy of like, well, if you're IEP, then there's something wrong. Or you're not normal, as Nicole was saying, which I totally agree with. It's like that's the idea of the IEP. Like, get you to the box. You're not in the box, and it's a problem that you're not in the box. So we're gonna fix your problem so you fit into the box, which is not. I don't think that's healthy. And then conversely, well, if you're gifted and talented, that means that you're just better than your peers, and we're going to treat you as such. And because you don't fit in that hierarchy there, then you're actually not that high achieving, or you're not that intelligent or what have you. I think we have to figure out those things first for those kind of designations to mean something.
Sometimes, like, these revelations can be bombs, right? Bombs on our psyche. And that brings us to Rabbi Darkside with the better bomb.
The better bomb, the better bomb. The line is drawn, so you better get on one side or the other. The better song, the better dance, but I'm waving against a metal baton. The better the bomb, the better the song. The line is drawn, so you better get on one side or the other. The better the bomb, the better dance, but I'm waving. Show me the internet is the new print press. Every hit set is the new intellect. And the television is the new telecast. The Republicans is the new Democrat. And the dirty ball is the new domestic threat. And Tommy Bond is the new gorilla forget. I'm back is the new one, so I'm trying to know. The four horns on the ball, big and big Japanese, German, veteran, Star Wars, burning, seven in the same color. He's the perfect. Center of the universe is a perfect man. Cause the sun don't shine. The seven on board to the new Superman. Indians are the same working man. Laws gonna be the new murder man. The next World War's waiting for a further name. Minimum wage, the murder plane. Biblical takes of researching, fam. His searches on the nervous switch. The keys get you trigger fingers on the murder switch. Smoke screens on the new tourniquets. Bedrooms, house, and new journalists. Turn it to is the new turn of 6 between 13 years old. Turn it to better song, better song. The lines are drawn, so you better get on. The rest of on, the better hands when I'm waving, it's a better song. The better song, better song. The lines are drawn, you better get on one side or the other. The rest of on, why you walking on the base one time? Nervous wrecks, rainforest gonna be burned to crisp. No news, never left for the current events. No sidewalks anywhere to curb your pets. Or ordered by younger be return events. Maybe we can keep one certain executive officer who crossed into this perfect mess. It might look something like the children of men. That's just a man who look at us and really focus on the shit to the children of friends. The easy thing might be a bit of a patch. It might be no escape behind a little hatch. See the government stop killing the rats. We're typically to keep the black stuff in its head. Bolivia is taking a cure. Going to the bus, they're listening to Cuba. We're about to run up Giuliani, second and junior freestyle. This is the new government. This is not so distant future. That's what you list, though I give it to you. Those who can see the living, we're gonna get it. Come on, that's the song, let it come. The last job, so you better get out of my side. The other things around the world, the better dance, but I'm paying me something on the song. The better song, the better song. The last job, so you better get out of my side. The other things around the world, the better dance, but I'm paying me something on the song.
So that was Rabbi Darkside with the better bomb. And I am going to let y'all in on a little secret. Everyone we have played today is an educator in some way, shape, or form. Rabbi is has been a teaching artist, a DOE teacher, and a college professor. So he's been at every every tier. Of course, we played me and Mikal earlier. We're educators. Gabriel Ramirez is a mentor with Urban Word. So everyone, and we have one more video she is also a DOE teacher. So we'll hear a little bit more of our educators who did not give up. Like I tell students all the time, just because this is not what you plan on doing to make money, you want to be a nurse or a doctor, whatever, you can still write poems. Like you can still make music, whatever. You can do whatever you want to and keep your artistic practice because it's part of wellness, right? So getting into other forms of education outside of public schools, we do have charter schools or private schools. There are parochial schools and things like that. What are the pros and cons of, or what do y'all think about these other types of schools, specifically charter and private?
I mean, I'll just say really quickly, like, again, I think the idea is sound. The practice of it is woeful. So that's really all I have to add. I mean, there's so many things that the application of them I have an issue with, but the idea of it makes sense to me, and I think could be done. My whole thing, I'm just gonna if it isn't clear, I'm just not. I am a reluctant capitalist, and it's just deeply flawed on multiple levels from a human standpoint. So that's just it. Like I think the pros of private and charter schools would be pro if it wasn't a revenue driving model. I think that destroys its benefits. So I don't know if there's pros as for me as it's done now. But the idea of it makes sense, and I think like if it was done in a non-capitalist way, I think it would be much more effective and have genuine pros.
Everyone agrees. Everyone's just like, yep, that's it. That's all I got.
Yeah, I really agree on that one. And I worked at a charter school for a period of time, and it's a great idea in theory, but when you're in it and you can just see things that are being done and the fact that it's a for-profit, it's run like a business. It's like, that's the bottom line. It's run like a business. So how can the well-being of the students be at the center when money is at the center? It doesn't make sense to me.
That's very true. And like, how are our schools funded? And how do y'all feel about that?
Well, that goes back to the capitalist model, right? I mean, it's basically done by our taxes. And here's the issue is that, and this is why we have disparities again because of capitalism, right? I was a teaching artist, and I know you, Dale, have been a teaching artist there for a very long time as well in the Bronx, which is one of the poorest congressional districts in the country. Meanwhile, several miles to the north, you have Westchester, one of the richest. And you can see the disparities, not only in terms of the resources, but even in the advocacy for students. So, again, there's not an equitable model within our capitalist system because, of course, if you live in a richer county, if you live in a richer borough, if you live in a richer neighborhood, the opportunities for you to fortify your school, to basically be that advocate for your child, to create alternative ways to help develop your child in school are greater at your disposal, and you're also not stigmatized. So like the way we even fund schools on a public level is just deeply and inherently flawed. It's not equitable. And we just got to tear this whole thing down. We just got to just tear this whole thing up, put it in the bin. It doesn't work. It doesn't serve everyone, and we're paying the cost, and we haven't paid the final cost. But there is a reckoning that's coming. It's coming in terms of the divisions we have between communities. There's a serious brain and soul drain that is causing all types of issues amongst us. And I won't say school is the sole thing, but it's definitely a bellwether for how our society and community is deteriorating at like a rapid rate. And you need to be able to fund these places, these other communities that help our actual society kind of thrive. And when you have the funding the way it is, where it's from the going back to the charter thing, it's private, where you have millionaires and foundations pouring money into these sort of like, you know, the Harlem Children's Zones of the world, just driving revenue in that way. And then you have the public model where it's like, okay, well, you know, your school will be as good as how much tax revenue you're bringing in. It's just it's very difficult to find a real equitable way. So it's just all around shitty. That's what it's just shitty.
Just to continue on that thread, you know, again, like, yes, pack it up, throw it away, and in doing so and telling or exploring the truth of this further, find out and name who's profiting off of these disparities and shame them, or find a way to cut, because
drive them out and send them to an
yeah,
island.
we're not gonna, don't try to appeal to their moral character or whatever. Just like do what you can to impede the flow of money to their pockets, because on truthfully, these folks haven't given a damn, that like they don't realize they live on the same floating rock that we all live on. But it doesn't care about the further deterioration of it. Like you all realize you live here too, right? And some of your kids, your houses are closer to the ocean. You don't see, but profit. So I don't care anymore as much about appealing to people, or at least decision makers' moral, compass. I'm not saying shaming is the only way at all, but for those who are so out of touch, so out of reach, I'm not going to waste my time trying to do that, or lead that way. What can be done? Back to advocacy, civic engagement, political inclusion, or forget inclusion, forcing your way in the room and forcing your voices, your individual and collective voice, to be heard, to publicly name and shame those who are profiting off of the school to prison pipeline, or just the complacency, the school to complacent worker pipeline, and see what shakes, see what that does to shake things up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. Like, I really think we're kind of watching the crumbling in slow motion that's happening right now. It's been happening for a while, but the pandemic is really bringing to light all of these dark corners of the education system. And we're seeing there already is, and it's just continuing to grow, a teacher shortage crisis. I was looking up some numbers earlier, just in preparation for this, and EdWeek Research Center did a study on this, and 54% of teachers said they are somewhat or very likely to leave the profession in the next 2 years. 54%, like more than half of teachers. That's wild. And the fact that the mental health issues like suicide rates have been way up amongst teenagers over the past year or two. People higher up, they're taking notice and realizing like something has to be done. And when this year's school budget was released, they added, I think it was like $600 million onto the New York City school budget. So it's about either 36 or 38 billion this year. And that sounds great. Like, okay, we're getting more funding. But then when you read more into it, it's just saying how schools are now getting the money that they were promised in the first place, that there was a huge deficit. So it's okay, great. We're glad that we're getting more money, but that was just money that was supposed to be coming in years ago. So I think this ultimately, I don't mean to paint a really negative picture of this, that this is ultimately a really good thing, because before anything can be rebuilt, it has to first be cleared out so that there's space and room for people to come to the drawing board and really decide how can we rebuild in a way that is actually conducive to the growth of our students and is going to support everyone that's in the education system, including the teachers and the educators themselves.
Yeah. Absolutely. Clearing out to make room for the new. Yes. Kwame, do you have an opinion?
I have a bunch of random thoughts. I don't know if it's one cohesive opinion though. just based upon what everyone's been like, something that Nicole said and something that Mikal and David said. I just I'm thinking about funding in general. So outside of New York City, when you're looking at your funding, you're looking at your property tax. When you're in New York City's looked at like one big district. So when you get your state money, it gets dispersed, and it's based by school is based upon the number of students you have on your register. The ones that you're able to have, like at the beginning of the school year by Halloween, who have actually shown up 2 or 3 times, right? So you want to make sure you have students in the building, because if you don't have those students, if you don't meet your register, you could lose thousands or tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. So nothing sadder than being a poor school in a poor neighborhood. It's like, what do we have to look forward to? That's one thing that's going on in my mind. Also, when you bring in all these students, naturally that's going to lead to larger class sizes, which we talked on earlier. So that there's a connection there. And then also reaching back to the previous question about like the charter school idea and the private school idea. On one hand, on the outside looking in, as far as funding goes, charter schools sounds good in my opinion, where, if you're able to have these millionaires pitch in and actually do something beneficial for the kids, that sounds all well and good. But just seeing the amount of teachers and students that seem burnt out by the whole process, it dismays me. Especially since just on August 1st, I believe, Success Academy already started up their school year. I have a Success Academy at the end of my block. So seeing the kids dressed up in their uniforms already after going through a hellish year and a half, I was like, I can't even watch this. I had to go back upstairs. That's my thought on the charters. I have other thoughts about private school. It depends. I grew up going to Catholic schools as a kid. So I felt like it really built up on discipline I had at home, and it set me up for a good adult life. But then there's also indoctrination there that could be dangerous. Like my kids go to Catholic school now. They come home talking about original sin and Eve did the wrong thing. Now they're looking at women the wrong way. And now I have to try to recondition my 6-year-olds. Just like I said, a bunch of random thoughts I have, none of them cohesive, but that's my spiel.
No, thank you for that. That's, yeah.
That was pretty cohesive, brother. I mean, that picture was pretty stark. That was, I mean, no, like it's no scary. Cap, like, yeah, it's scary. But everything you said, I mean, like that was really like the hands-on experience of what we're all talking about. Like that, like what Nicole and I were saying about that deterioration. That's literally it in the real time.
Mikal, you went to parochial school for a little bit when you were young too.
Lacadere Academy, Montclair, New Jersey. Lacadere Academy.
Did you feel like you got like negative ideas from it?
Absolutely. The first time that I can really remember actual true corporal punishment was in Catholic school. I'm left-handed naturally. I was forced to try to write right-handed. They actually like tied a pencil in my right hand when I was learning cursive to try to get me to write right-handed. Like these
roll out to Jersey and burn down his.
Oh yeah, no. there was the, I forget what they call them, but it's basically like the dean. It's like the head nun, but it's like sister something. They would literally bring you to a room, and they had a ruler with they spank students for like certain things. Like it was wild. It was absolutely wild. But kind of to what Kwame was saying, I think a lot of parents accept that because the discipline of charters sort of mimics, which is kind of how school is. It mimics. It's like you're getting them prepared for the real world. They're developing these like sort of like toughness traits and understanding how to like abide by rules and things like that. And it's sort of like, but you're actually kind of, you're deteriorating the human aspect of who they are and are going to be. So like, and that's heartbreaking, brother. I can't even imagine a young person trudging to school right now in August.
Early
After
August,
all,
not in New York. That's unheard of. Like in South Carolina, this is the normal time you start school. Like you usually start school the first or second week of August. But like in New York, like you barely got a summer. What is that?
and I was gonna say, but don't you guys get out earlier too? Like you don't get out at the end of June
Yeah,
in South Carolina, right? You get out
we get
like
out the last week of May.
exactly. So you're going back earlier, but you still have a lot of time to this is and again there's so much I think that's one of the things that's the worst thing about this whole situation with the pandemic in schools, right? Schools are really, really ignoring that we all are still going through a deeply traumatic experience, right? And it's like the attitude is just like business as usual, back to work. And we're going to see fallout. Like this school year is going to be really, really, really difficult. If I was a betting person on unprecedented levels, and I'm really afraid of what us as people that work in education on the not-for-profit side, classroom teachers like yourself, Kwame, are going to experience with these students and with each other because there's no outward conversation and thing, for lack of a better term, right now around like, hey, we're in the middle of a medical pandemic, and we've lost family members, we've lost friends, we've been isolated and haven't had opportunities to connect on all types of emotional levels. And we get back in the classroom with 35 students and that teacher you hate, and like get ready to get up at 7 in the morning to get to class at 8 and sit in the same chair, with the kid in rows with the kid spitballing behind you and all. It's just like it's criminal. It's criminal. It's
Would
criminal.
it make it easier if all of our school systems were, or all of our schools were gender or cultural based? Like all the students from this ethnic background are here. All the students of this gender are here, and so on and so forth.
I don't know, but I wanted to. So I went to St. John's Elementary School on I think it was 11 Winthrop Street in Flatbush, Brooklyn, and excuse the sirens in the background. It was a Caribbean Christian school. Family is religious, but we didn't necessarily, especially my immediate, didn't go to, weren't like the church going every week type, and I didn't mind that. So this was like the kind of pillar of the most consistent aspect of that part of my life in my life, right? There was a lot of good things about it. Not that I appreciated in the moment, but including the discipline. Miss Green, my fourth grade teacher, might be the most influential, if I had to really think about it, teacher I've ever had in my life, for a number of reasons I won't go into. So yeah, like I mean, whether I was indoctrinated, I don't know. That's a whole other thing. I don't think that. So I think that school helped me. But you know what also happened? My mom couldn't afford for my younger sister to go. So she had to do what she had to do. And my sister lived away from us for a couple of years in another state because my mom couldn't afford to pay for both of us to go to the same school. And in many ways, we're still feeling the ripple effects of that because my sister went through a lot of stuff, man. A lot of stuff. And that stuff, that breaks my heart. In terms of opportunities for students, why some things are afforded to some that aren't afforded to others. So yeah, I had it. I was lucky. Like my family pitched in to help me go to this thing. But my sister was almost she felt the consequences of not being able to have that consistency. Right. She eventually came back to New York, but she came back different. So And that's one. Look, I get it. These are two individual circumstances, but I'm saying there's a real time, like real effect that I see on this as well.
Thank you for sharing that, David. My last question I asked around gender and cultural background, because I know at least in African American communities, sometimes there is discussions around like, well, integration is the worst thing to happen to us because we stopped teaching our own history. We stopped teaching each other. Like our students were now being taught by people who didn't look like them, and were their own background was being diminished and they were seen as lesser than, whereas even though the school wasn't being like, the actual building wasn't as nice, like the student, you could argue that the teachers actually cared about them. Or even I was in the Marine Corps, and there was always an argument about not boot camp is gendered. There's the females are over here and the males are over here, and the males can't concentrate when females are around. Like the females will be fine, but the males just act like crazy whenever there are females around, you know? I don't know. I wonder, is there like merit to these ideas?
Well, first, thank you, David, for sharing, and I appreciate, again, just you being that open and allowing us to share that. So I appreciate you, and I appreciate that you were able to do that. So thank you for that. And I feel like that's just the motif, like the way in which we've created these sort of unnatural systems, we're all the product of these things, and they've had these damaging effects. So I appreciate you sharing that with us, because this is what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about. I think, Dale, to what you're asking about, and thank you for clarifying the question, because there is a deep history, especially within the Black community. St. Kofa schools, Patrice Lumumba, Ocean Hill, 1960s, freedom schools. And it's also on the negative side too, right? In terms of the schools that, I think those were actually the freedom schools, is for the reservations and things like that. I think in a world that does not appreciate and accept all forms of humanity, the concept and idea of, say, an all-gender school, or an all whatever cultural background school, ethnic background school, makes sense. But that's what's the weird rub. It makes sense. Like, for example, there's Barnard College, right? And there's women's schools all across the country historically. And those were why? Because either women were not allowed to go to school at all, or schools that were integrated were simply not safe for women, right? I think there's huge benefits, obviously, when you have shared identity and shared history, and that's a powerful thing and a safe space potentially. But as I kind of think about it from a large, and this is a place we're not at yet, so I want to be clear, we're not at this place yet. The constructs still exist, they're still real because we put stock into them, right? So the constructs of race and gender aren't really real, but they are real because we continue to put stock into them. We continue to perform them, we continue to value them, right? But we know in all phases and facets they're essentially myths. So because of that, the idea of these schools, depending on how they're run, makes sense. But I think in a world that I can imagine where just humanness is just accepted and appreciated, there wouldn't be a need for a school that's gender or culture based because of that. I think a lot of the solutions we have are the answer to a broken system, and those answers are incomplete. They are insufficient, and they come with their own set of problems because they're trying to fix something that's unfixable, in my opinion.
That's a good point. I know for me personally, like thinking about going to all women's school, like I thought about going to all women's school for college and was just like, no. And I don't remember my exact points, but it was like a hard no. I was like, oh, okay, great. You went to Spelman. That's great. That's good for you. Like, and I didn't, it never even crossed my mind. I was just like, no. And I don't have a thing with like women are weird or I'm not, like the pick me girl. I'm not like anything like that. It's just like I wanted to be around a whole bunch of people and learn a whole bunch about everybody. And for me, because I had gone to K through 12 was predominantly Black, because where I grew up was kind of like willfully segregated, even though they hadn't been segregated in 20 something years, right? I was like, I'm not going to HBCU because yes, I will meet lots of different people, but it's different because I've never been in this environment and the world doesn't look like an HBCU. And I mean, I went to a very Black PWI, like no one ever believes that. I'm like, we were there. Like, there's no way you could have gone to the University of South Carolina in the early 2000s and be like, there are no Black people here. Like, nah, we here. We have the best everything here at this school. You know us. So that was also a blessing that was like my college experience, but I don't know.
You made me think about my own experience too, based upon what you said. Um, I went to an all boys high school, and just like a lot of schools around the city, it's segregated. I mean, it's segregated already. I mean, you're going to a very homogenous school. Your Black and brown kids are going one place, your white students are going someplace else. In my school, there were about maybe 2,000 students, and 10 of them might have been white. Right? So I went from going to an all boys high school full of Black and brown people to going to a college that was co-ed and over 60% white. So I remember my first week on campus, it was the wildest thing I had experienced, because I was like, last time I saw a woman in a school, or a young lady in a school, was 8th grade, right? And now these are women, grown women walking around campus. I'm like, it was like really exotic, like something I'd never seen before, you know? And then also I was like, where did all these white people come from? That was another thing, right? Because I'm just used to being in a school around yourself. So I think there was a little bit of an adjustment period there for me, like getting reacclimated to being around women, being around people who weren't Black or brown, just realizing the world is much bigger than what I had been experiencing up to that point.
Yeah.
I feel like I got a lot out of being around, my people growing up. Even though the curriculum still wasn't necessarily focused, to be honest with you, on like Black history, funny enough. And then I went to Brooklyn Tech, and it was like I went from this small school where my class size was or my graduating class was like 30 kids or 27 kids, to a building that was housing 5,000, right? With culture shock in a way, right? But I also appreciated the racial diversity, just to say that racial and ethnic diversity that was inherent within that setting as well, and then that kind of followed me, or I followed it, or whatever. It's a city college. I don't know. I don't know how I would have fared. I don't know if I would have fared too well, to be honest. If I did end up going away, let's just say, no offense to Syracuse, I'm just going to say Syracuse University, because if I did go away, it would have been to a school with like a healthy sports program, and I would have wanted to see some college games. So, but like if I would have gone like north to Syracuse, I don't know how well I would have fared, or how much I would have valued learning more about Black culture and history and knowledge of self. I don't know. So yeah, in an ideal world, throw us all in there. But I don't. But I don't think my high look. I didn't love like I'm proud that I went to tech, and I'm dear friends with a group of people to this day. Some of my closest people in life. I didn't love high school overall, but I don't know if I would have handled it, as well as I had in terms of knowledge of self, even though I was young, and still learning, if I didn't have the foundation that was built being around people, Miss Green, and people, not just the teachers, but my fellow students before that, if that makes sense. So it did create a great foundation for me that undoubtedly still is there somewhere within me to this day.
Yeah, I really see like what everyone's saying about this sense of community and really identity that's being built through the school that you're going to is so significant. And I think what's being taught is really significant also. Like, what is the curriculum like? And for me, like I went to a predominantly white high school, and the only time that I was exposed to literature that wasn't like a dead old white man there was this one unit in particular where we got to choose. It was like the multicultural unit, and I read Bless Me Ultima, and I was so excited because I was like, oh, Mexico, like this is something that I can really connect with. But other than that, like that was it. And I think having the element of choice is really important here, like with the curriculum, with the people you're surrounding yourself with, so that if a student wants to learn more about their culture or anything related to it, they have the opportunity to do that. And the curriculum isn't being predetermined that you're going to learn about like these years or this thing or whatever someone else is deeming that you should learn about. I just think choice is really like the thing when it comes to that, because everyone's different and everyone learns in different ways and they benefit from different surroundings.
Yeah. Don't get it twisted, Betsy DeVos, because you're going to say, see, she said school choice. No, we're not co-opting everything here. No, Mr. Voss, you have enough yachts.
I had a question in here about the voucher system, and I was like, do we have time? Do we have time to talk about the voucher system? But in the past, I did have a friend who asked me, like, why are people so upset about the voucher system? And I'm like, and this was a Southern friend, and I was like, you should know. Like, do you really not get it? But anytime you take away money from public schools is a bad thing. It's just and we are running close to time. I have a couple more questions for y'all, and I would like to know, because we're all so experienced and have like all these different things that we want to see for our students. So what subjects would you implement and make mandatory in your school if you were to have your own school?
Research and statistics.
Financial literacy and gardening.
I love that you said gardening. I agree with that. And I also think a class that's centered around how to connect with yourself, how to regulate your emotions, how to navigate relationships.
Yeah.
I have the idea of having a literacy class. It could be literature literacy, it could be digital literacy, some sort of communication. And then I think it was Mikal that mentioned practical application earlier. Like I want math, but I want it as a part of STEM. I want a full STEM so that you can, because I look at the memes going around about, another day where I can't figure out how to use slope to figure something out today, right? Because there's a lot of stuff you just learn in school that you never use again. But I think through STEM, that's where you really get to figure out why you're using this math, how you're going to use it, how it's benefiting you. And then I also like the idea of having some sort of civics program in place, something about just being aware of your role as a citizen, being aware of the government, because I think a lot of times people wait for, I know the 5%ers call it a mystery God, right? You wait for a mystery God or mystery president to save you, when in actuality, you have a lot of power in your local government that can affect your day-to-day living conditions. So I think some sort of education around that's important.
Yeah.
Just one more thing to add. Brilliant. An elective, even for the young kids, martial arts. Now, I wish my cousins out west did it. I admired them when I got to like sit in on them. I think it touches a little bit on what Nicole was saying about not everything, but a little bit of regulation of self and emotions and whatnot, or something to channel through, sports in one hand. For the most part, when I was a kid, it was mine. But I think martial arts and the element of self-defense and whatnot, and I think that would be a good. But I wouldn't make it mandatory. I'd make it an elective.
Yeah. I think nonviolent communication courses and like debate is like, I keep seeing in movies and stuff, students on the debate team. I'm like, I've never been in a school with a debate team. And am I just like missing it? Like, that actually teach genteel discussion? I've never seen it. It's like the biggest thing apparently in faux teenagers' lives. Like they have to make the debate after school, and I'm just like, that's not happening anywhere in America ever.
Well, we had mock trial, and it basically functioned like debate.
Yeah,
but not a real debate team. We also had a chess club.
Chess is big in New York. I'm not surprised at a chess club.
I went to school in Jersey, though, baby, so it's a little different.
For you, it was like mind blowing.
Well, yeah, but to be honest with you, talk about something that I learned in school that I wish I'd kept up. I used to play chess when I was in junior high, and because it wasn't something that carried over into high school and no one in my family played, I stopped playing chess, and that's a great way to understand strategy, and it's awesome. So that's like a skill that I was learning and developing that it atrophied. I don't have it.
And it teaches you. It teaches you war essentially, but like how government thinks and how government essentially works. Just like not what a lot of people think of when they think of chess. I had another one like going into communication debate, and also everyone should get a nap. Everyone should get a nap. You should have like yoga nidra. Everyone just goes to the gym and they play some low music and they're like electric candles, and everyone should just knock out.
And time to go outside. Time to go outside and get in the fresh air.
Yes.
Yeah, speaking about the nap, that's one of the biggest shocks of first grade to me. You go from kindergarten where you have snack time and nap time, you get to first grade and it's like, you mean I don't get the nap?
No nap?
There's no snack? I'm surprised I stayed in school.
That shit is whack. You're like 6 years old, that shit is whack, yo. I want my chocolate milk and my cookie, man. What's up?
I'm telling you, the teachers need that chocolate milk and that cookie around nap time too. All right. But we're going to get into Angela Brown with Come Around My Way.
Come around my way. Come around my way. Come around my way. Come around my way. I could take this Harlem night and wrap around you sounds and sights. So shine like bodegas neon lights on my path. I looked hard and found a Harlem halfway hidden in rebirth, regret, resistance, and real life. Yeah. So come and check this urban mecca and write, sing, dream, dance, dream of hope, of home, advance to avant-garde or a hardcore Harlem strife. We bring life to lyrics, like Langston Hughes, painted passion, beauty, anger, angst, and bebop blues on poem pages. Yeah. Or explore like Zora. Simply said, shed light on how it feels to be colored neat. To let others see your side of it. Your pride, despite your plight. Your bright, bold, poised, and playful. To seize the day. Just another day. tropics to New York. There's no stopping this force. The fire burning higher this time when it hits. So are you hip to this? Harlem, are you hip? Happy big business is back, yes. Old Navy and Starbucks. Some smile inside at the new high rises. Like the price for us. How nice for us. Seems like a magical makeover may take overnight for the right cash. Consumed, confined by dollar signs already. So read my lips. Get up, better get a grip before it slips. Hey Harlem, are you hip?
So that was Angela
God.
Brown with Come Around My Way. And we've had a very insightful discussion. I hope it's been interesting to listen to, and I hope everyone on the panel is like, I hope y'all feel good. I hope you feel full. And I'd love to know your last thoughts. And can we start with Nicole? What are your last thoughts?
Yeah, well, I first wanted to say thank you so much for having me on. This conversation has been very insightful and interesting, and thank you to everyone. And I would say my last thought is just given that a lot of our conversation, it is a little bit bleak because that's the state of things right now, but to just leave with a hopeful note that things, given that we continue to have these conversations and to really take aligned action to create change in the school system, that we can really build something that is just so much better. I'm holding out for that.
Thank you. David?
Thank you again for this. For sure. For sure. Thank you and Mikal for inviting me to join another episode. I think it is evidence of some of what we've already said. I mean, obviously, things can't just stay in conversational form, but I highly doubt. I think one of the reasons why this conversation was so insightful and enlightening is because I'm talking to folks and listening to folks who are in the doing, consistently and over time, and not in isolation either. So this is an example of what was mentioned by a few of you earlier of, and Kwame was the last one to say, like, not waiting for, some entity to bestow permission or power to you, but like, what groundswell can we create here, in pods and sections, and then ripple out to really access our power and our imagination. Because I don't, now this is, I guess, the last thing on it. I think that this conversation is reminding me or reinforcing that, like, I'm not as interested in power alone, or even the discussion on power alone. It's power in community, it's power in imagination, it's power in creativity, power in ingenuity, power and compassion. So thank you for this as an example of that. And I think there's more we can do to create groundswells, regionally, citywide, internationally, to make that happen. So thank you.
Thank you. Kwame?
It was great to be here with all you guys. Thanks for inviting me, Dale. And I think a final thought might just be love. Just love. Have some capacity in your heart and have some regard for others.
Yeah. Yes, poetry snaps. Mikal Amin, what are your final thoughts?
I want to thank everyone for coming. This is, we always have really powerful, amazing discussions, and I really appreciate y'all taking the time and contributing the energy to the show. I guess just my final thoughts is that we really do need to start considering the cost of what we have. And do we want to continue to pay that cost in terms of education? But as has already been said by pretty much everyone, I'm sitting here on a panel with administrators in the not-for-profit sector, practitioners, public school educators that all have the right ideas and mindset and are putting those things into practice in their communities of young people and educators as well. So there's some hope there, because I don't think we all have the answers, or we all came to like the aha solution. I think we have some really great things that would make a hell of a school potentially. But that wasn't the purpose of this. But what I do know is what Dave was pointing out, is like, it's good to be in a community of people that are doing things that I know are thinking about the costs and trying to find ways for us to get more benefits, and help the next generation and future generations develop better than we did. And that's what kind of keeps me going, because I've definitely become, sadly, much more cynical in recent days. So conversations like this remind me that there are people fighting and there are people doing, and I think that's what we need to find more of, because the cost is real.
Thank you. And I appreciate all of you being here. Thank you so much for being on Poets to the People. Yeah, I hope we all have the strength to keep doing what we're doing, and regardless of how that looks, whether it's traditional or non-traditional. I know that you're doing it for the right reasons, at least everyone on this panel. So, like, we could have had a whole podcast about bad reasons people become educators. But don't forget your why. And yeah, once again, thank you. And thank you everyone who's listening. So this has been Poets to the People, and my name is Dale Novella, and I hope you have a wonderful night.